What's your greatest weakness? That's a question that makes many aspiring school leaders freeze in an interview. In this episode, I'll show you how to answer it with clarity, confidence, and strategy. What's going on, aspiring school leader? I am Dr. Donovan Smalls II, educator, best-selling author, school leadership coach, and I help aspiring school leaders confidently land their first leadership role and lead with impact from day one. Today's topic is how to answer the weakness question with confidence. School leadership interview tips. Now, when it comes to the question, what is your weakness? Unfortunately, there are people who do not know how to appropriately respond to that question. And I do understand because it does take some nuance, it does take some strategy, and it does take your ability to be self-reflective, self-aware, to truly understand what your weaknesses are, but then make them appear to be things that you're not appear, but things that you're actually working on, and things that you can frame as actually being strengths, right? So it does take a little bit of practice when it comes to answering that question. And so in today's episode, I want to give you 3 points as it relates to answering the question with confidence, with clarity, and with strategy. And again, the question is, what is your weakness? So point number 1, why the weakness question exists. So it's not a trap. Again, this is about self-awareness, reflection, and growth. I would argue that the best leaders are actually the ones that are most self-aware. Those are the ones who truly understand that when it comes to leadership, the first person that you must be appropriately leading is yourself. Because if you can't lead yourself, then you can't lead anybody else, right? If you can't lead yourself in terms of time management, you can't lead anybody else. If you can't lead yourself in terms of your tasks and the things that you need to get done, then you can't lead anyone else. And so it's so important if you're trying to be a leader, if you are an aspiring leader and you're watching this episode, I want you to understand that self-awareness is going to be what grounds you. It's going to be something that helps you understand your strengths, your weaknesses, the things that you need to work on, your tendencies, right? And so it's not a trap that the hiring committee is asking you this question. They truly are looking for you to be self-reflective. Are you somebody that is going to not just make a decision, but make a data-driven decision and then be reflective about it to make the appropriate adjustments if needed? Are you going to see the things that you did well in terms of making that decision and then continue with that process and following the process that you did to make that great decision and then be able to scale that throughout the school building, right? These are the things that you need to be self-reflective about. But if you are not self-aware, then it's going to show when you are answering this question. Hiring committees also want to see that you are coachable. Are you someone that is going to be able to take correction? Are you someone that's going to be able to take correction and not get defensive? You know, I remember when I got hired as a vice principal my first year. I remember we were preparing for the school year during the summer, getting everything in order, and I started to rattle off a bunch of ideas and things that I thought would be great for us to do for the upcoming school year, right? I was really trying to be intentional about being an instructional leader, doing our instructional rounds, getting into classrooms, figuring out forms that we could create that would allow us to streamline our walkthroughs. And I thought that they were all great. However, one of my co-VPs who's been doing this for 20 years was able to tell me, okay, these are some great ideas that you have, but we also need to read the room. We need to be able to go into the school year. Yes, we have our plans, but we need to be able to have conversations with teachers. We need to assess before we try to put plans in that are concrete as it relates to doing these instructional rounds, because it's truly going to fall to the wayside if we're not gathering data first and allowing the data to drive what we are going to do as instructional leaders. In that moment, I could have gotten defensive, I could have shut down, or I could have gone back and forth. However, it's important, again, to show a level of humility. Are you coachable? Are you somebody that's going to be able to work well with others because you are not leading in a silo? When you become an assistant principal, when you become a supervisor, you are working with other people. And are you coachable? That's what the hiring committee wants to see. And so it's not just about you answering the question, what is your weakness or what are your weaknesses? It's about them being able to project how you're going to be able to work with other people and not cause unnecessary conflict or not dim your light as a leader because somebody chose to correct you because they've been doing this longer than you, right? We have to be humble leaders, not people that forget who we are as leaders, right? Our light continues to shine. We continue to be salt when we need to be. But at the end of the day, we need to be able to listen to other people who have experiences in areas where we don't, who have been doing this longer than us. Because when you get promoted to the next level, you're always going to start as a novice. So what I mean by that is you as a teacher, yes, you're getting promoted to leadership, right? And in some eyes, people can look at that as going up the ladder. However, you're still at the bottom in terms of you not necessarily knowing what it's like to sit in the seat of leadership. And so you have to be humble enough, right? Not get defensive, to listen to other people so that they can actually guide you in the right direction. So the hiring committee, they want to see if you understand how your growth areas affect others, meaning teachers, students, and parents. So that's why this question exists, because when they ask you, what are your weaknesses, they are also projecting how that is going to impact students, teachers, and parents. So the hiring committee is projecting whether you're actually going to be able to handle your own in situations of conflict, right? In situations of leadership where you're going to be leading other people. Are you making decisions that are going to be best for students and also for staff? So those are some of the things that they're truly looking for when they ask that question. That's why it exists. The question exists for you to show a level of self-awareness and reflection so that the hiring committee can see the type of leader that you're going to be. Point number 2, choosing the right weakness. Extremely important. You have to be strategic in this area. Avoid cliches like I work too hard or I care too much, right? Everybody can easily say those things, right? But you want to pick something that's real, but not a fatal weakness. One that doesn't disqualify you as a leader. So for example, you might want to talk about delegation. You might want to talk about the fact that you enjoy a level of control when it comes to trying to get things done because you believe that it's going to be done the right way, right? There is this cliche of saying if you want things done correctly, then do it your own. But you might talk about how you've learned that you don't have the capacity or the margin to do everything on your own. But what you've learned is that delegation is actually a sign of trust. Because if you're delegating to other people, that means that you have to trust them enough to get the job done. And it's also coming back to humility, believing that other people can also do what you do because they can, right? You are not the only person. We are not the only people who can lead, but we have to be humble enough to recognize that. You might also talk about time management or handling conflict. Those are some things that we'll unpack a little bit later in this episode, but I want to throw those out as examples that you can use in terms of choosing the right weakness. So here's a framework that you can use when talking about that question, when responding to that question. What is your weakness? Be honest. show growth, and connect it to leadership. So as we start getting into a few examples, right? When we start talking about delegation, you might respond to the question of what are your weaknesses? You might talk about delegation. You might say, earlier in my career, I tended to take on too much myself because I wanted everything to be done perfectly, right? You might talk about the past. Then you might move to the present and say, I've learned to delegate by building trust with teacher leaders and empowering colleagues to take ownership of projects. And then you might say, as an assistant principal, I'll keep strengthening this skill to ensure teachers feel ownership while I focus more on school-wide priorities. Once you land your first leadership role, one of the things you'll notice is that you absolutely cannot do everything on your own. And what I've learned is that if you're trying to do everything on your own, that's actually not a good sign of being a great leader, because it shows that you are trying to be in control of everything. It's going to limit your time in classrooms and to your ability to be an instructional leader and focus on kind of those school-wide initiatives and things that you need to be a part of and leading. And it's going to show a lack of trust for the people who can actually do things better than you in areas where you might actually need a little more development. And so you have to be somebody that's going to be able to delegate. And that might be a great example for you to use if that is genuinely one of your weaknesses. Another example, you might talk about time management. You might say, at times I struggled with balancing urgent tasks with long-term planning. I've started using structured scheduling, prioritizing with to-do frameworks, right? Or a to-do list, and protecting time for deep work. And then you might say, in a leadership role, I'll apply these systems to balance immediate needs like discipline with long-term instructional planning. Time management is going to be your friend. One of the strategies I use is I use Google Calendar, and I schedule all of my observations there, all of my meetings there. I set my alerts, my alarms. I even have like when I'm going to have lunch duty and what time lunch duty ends and what time that we need to bring the students in from their recess, right? All of these things, time management is going to be your friend. And figure out systems that are going to work for you once you land that first leadership role. Because although we want to be instructional leaders, and we should be, the reality of school leadership is that we have so many other things that we need to do to help run a building. And if you're not great with time management, it's going to limit your time in terms of helping teachers become better practitioners. And so you have to be somebody that protects your time. If you are fortunate enough to have a colleague or a secretary who can also help you with your time management, I suggest that you allow them to hold you accountable, because there's so many things that you're going to have to do, and you have to be able to manage your time well. And the last example that I want to go over, right, is handling conflict, because as a school leader, that's a part of your role. That's inherent in your role. So in your interview, right, you might say early on, I avoided tough conversations because I didn't know, or I didn't want to cause tension. Through professional development and coaching, I've learned to approach conflict directly, but respectfully, focusing on solutions, not blame. As a school leader, I'll continue building this skill to ensure staff and parents feel heard while keeping students' needs at the center. That's the key. You have to keep the needs of students at the center. If you find yourself, once you land your first leadership role, capitulating to the constant needs of other people that are not centered on students, then you have to start doing some self-reflection. Be self-aware enough to realize that your leadership is straying toward the preferences of adults and not the needs of kids. You don't want to be in that area. You want to be in the area of doing things that are best for students. And so sometimes handling conflict is a part of that. When you become a school leader, you're going to have to deal with conflict, but I want you to realize that conflict can be your friend. Conflict means that there is an issue that needs to be addressed. And when we address that issue, it's going to allow things to run a lot smoother, and it's going to allow you to lead a lot better. But if you do not address the conflict, what's going to happen is things are going to continue to be perpetuated that aren't going to cause the outcome that you are actually looking for. So you have to address conflict. And I'm not saying that you have to do it in a way that's mean or condescending, because you shouldn't. And I'm not also saying that you handling conflict is going to look the way that I handle conflict. But give yourself permission to understand how you're going to deal with conflict in a way that is authentic to you, so that you're doing it in a way that's genuine. You keep the dignity of the other person on the other side of the receiving end, but you are ultimately addressing it in a way that is going to cause the result that you're looking for. Conflict is inherent in leadership. You cannot run from it. And so you have to become comfortable with the fact that you're going to have to address things that you feel like you probably shouldn't even have to address, right? It happens all the time. But you have to get comfortable with it, because that's what leadership is. When you say you now want to become a school leader, you can no longer run from conflict and just complain about problems like some people might do. You are now going into the position of figuring out solutions. Other people can complain all day, but you can't. You have to be somebody that's able to handle the weight of leadership. And in that means you're handling conflict. So today we talked about the question that often comes up in an interview, right? We talked about the weakness question, how to answer the weakness question with confidence. We talked about why the weakness question exists. We talked about choosing the right weakness, and then also how to frame your weakness as growth in progress. This is one of the things that I help aspiring school leaders do in my coaching program, Elevate Your Impact. And if you're someone who knows that you need help with interview preparation, you have no idea what a school leadership interview looks like, or you have been interviewing, but you need some feedback in terms of what needs to change for you to actually land that first leadership role, reach out. Let's have a conversation so that we can help get you to where you know you need to be, land that first leadership role so you can impact the students and the school community for the greater good of the students that you serve. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you subscribe so that you never miss a message. As always, I hope you have a great week of teaching, leading, and learning. Take care.